Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Waumsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome again to the WP Builds podcast. Very glad to have you here. This is episode number 184, entitled Limited Client Access versus Full Access. It was published on the 18th of June 2020. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and a few bits and pieces just before we begin. Please, if you feel able to share the podcast with your friends and colleagues, if they're into WordPress, please do that in whatever way you see fit. Also, if you're not aware, we have a subscribe page where you can keep up to date with everything we do. We produce quite a lot of content each week, as I'll explain in a moment, but if you go to wpbuilds.com/subscribe, there's a couple of forms you can fill out to get on our email lists, plus you can find us on your favourite podcast player. There's some links on that page too, and join our Facebook group of over 2,600 very friendly WordPressers. So that's wpbuilds.com/subscribe. The other pages to mention are wpbuilds.com/deals. I say each week it's a bit like Black Friday, but every day of the week. It's a page full of discount codes for various plugins and themes, all things in the WordPress space. So if you're in the market for something, perhaps go and check it out. Speaking of checking it out, did you know that we produce a podcast every Thursday? You're listening to it now. We also produce a WordPress weekly news, which comes out on a Monday, very early in the morning, and at 2 p.m. UK time on a Monday. We also have a live version of the news. You can get to that at wpbuilds.com/live, and I'm always joined by some notable WordPress people, and it's a lot of fun. Join in the conversation. That's great. The other page to mention is wpbuilds.com/advertise if you would like to get your product or service in front of a WordPress specific audience, a bit like A/B Split Test have done. Want to set up your A/B split test in record time, like in a couple of minutes? Use your existing pages and test anything against anything else. Buttons, images, headers, rows, really anything. The best part, it works with Elementor, Beaver Builder and the WordPress block editor. Check it out at absplittest.com. Just one last thing before we begin. I've started doing a live podcast series. We're usually going to be doing them on a Tuesday, I think, with Sabrina Zaiden. Now, Sabrina has a new plugin. I'm helping to promote the A/B Split Test plugin, so we thought it might be quite a nice idea to chart the journey for how the plugins grow over time. How do we engage the audience? How do we get people to notice it? What is it? What is that process? What does it look like? Now, we're not coming from a position of expertise. We're learning on the job, if you like, so please feel free to join us. You can find links again at wpbuilds.com/live on a Tuesday, or you can go to our Facebook group and we'll be certain to be posting it in there. Okie dokie, let's get on with the podcast, shall we? Episode number 184, Limited Client Access versus Full Access. I'm sure you've been here before. How much do your clients really need access in their WordPress website? Do they need full control? Would you even allow them full control? Is that a silly idea? Do they go and break things? Should you limit what they do? It's a bit of a puzzle. I know that I've played with all sorts of different things, installing plugins to allow the editor role to be expanded or contracted, and David also has done this, and so we discuss this thorny topic today. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, today's debate, we are talking about whether we should be limiting client access to WordPress or giving full access. So this debate has gone on for ages, hasn't it, Nathan? Yeah. There's a few caveats. We've got to set up the debate a little bit on this one, because both you and I are in a similar position in the fact that we generally are only dealing with one client who's responsible for the site. So that's probably going to change the way that we view this, I think. But we do behave differently. So you're going to be taking the limited client access, and I'm going to take the full access. But I must admit, I'm taking a side that I no longer kind of believe in so much.
You'll have to argue from the dim, distant memory of how you used to do it. But also, quick confession up front, I flip-flop on this one just based upon kind of what the relationship is going forwards with the client, you know, whether they're going to be on a care plan or whether it's just something that I'm, kind of handing over. or whether they're going to be with me for the foreseeable, whether they've paid up front for 24 months of care or something. It really does depend. And also their technical competence. If they demonstrably demonstrate that they can navigate WordPress and they've got familiarity with it and they know what not to touch, that also has an effect. So I think that's good to say at the beginning. But we'll take a position, one side and the other, and we'll just argue it from those points. So mine is limit the access you give to clients, whereas yours is full access. Maybe you want to start, because it feels like the having everything open is the way to start, and then we'll talk about why you might want to might want to limit it.
Yeah, so I mean, why I changed a bit is because I did play around with this, just because being new to WordPress and trying to get a good client experience, I thought I'd play around with a lot of the sort of tools that were out there where you could kind of white label the experience. But alongside that, I also saw there was a lot of debates about this, with a lot of people saying, no, you can't give your clients access. And it made me want to go the other way. So I went totally on the side of full access, just for the whole transparency of the business. I wanted to say there's nothing that I'm hiding from them. This is WordPress. I'm building your WordPress site. So I really went in. That was my key thing for giving full access: transparency. Just wanted to have that kind of adult relationship with the client, where saying, look, this is what I do. I'm helping you with your WordPress site. Nothing to hide here, and that was actually my key thing.
That's a really nice feeling. I think there's a lot of credibility with that, and also just a nice feeling that we're all into WordPress. Clearly, you and I more than most, but it's a nice feeling that you're spreading the word about it, and you're not trying to hide things. And should they at some point in the future part ways with you, or just become curious, the fact that they've got access to everything means that they can do anything without fear of butting up against, you don't have permission to access this page problems and so on.
Yeah, and I had, I guess because really, I suppose my first proper client really was my colleague who I worked with. So I was building the sites for her and her clients. And often she would be going in and doing work. So when I removed some of the full access from her, she was just like some of the clients I've now got, who will just go and Google something on WordPress and realize what they've got isn't what, because most of the articles out there on working with WordPress assume that you've got full admin rights. So then I would just get questions: can I have access to this? Or what's going on? Why is this not the same?
Yes, I'm sure we've all had that. If you've tried to limit things, the whole problem of the menu structure on the video that you've shot for them doesn't match up with the menu structure and what they can see. And actually, sometimes I'm not even sure what the menu structure that they can see looks like. That whole nonsense of logging out, logging in as an editor or whatever it might be, checking it all out, and then logging back in as yourself and telling them what they can actually see and can't see.
Yeah, and the one that really did it for me, I think, is that I used one plugin, a really great plugin, but it did absolutely everything. It did the white labeling, it hid whatever you liked, and gave a whole login experience. But it failed on one update, and it gave permissions on the wrong things, and so it hid the wrong things and revealed the wrong things. And I thought, I just really don't want to touch this.
Right.
And honestly, to be honest here, I'm kind of moving on to your thing. You really persuaded me, I think, to go along the kind of role of giving people the editor access, which is pretty much what I'm doing more of nowadays, because I realized that it's a defined role already, and that does most of what I want and most of what they need.
Yes.
And so... yeah, so they were the main reasons for not wanting to go down. Giving full access was just to keep that kind of transparency for me, and not to get into the plugins that could mess things up, was my kind of major reason for doing it.
Yeah, and I think they're completely legitimate. The reasons that that I want to kind of hide things or have hidden things in the past, and again, caveat is that I do flip and flop on this a little bit, is just... it's the burden of having to go back in and mend things that get broken. Some people are a little bit more cavalier than others, shall we say, and they're just curious and they go around clicking things, and before you know it, they've I don't know. The worst case, I suppose, would be they've somehow gone into the ability to edit the plugins and things like that, and they've deleted bits of code, or they've tried to insert some kind of PHP that they copy and pasted off the internet, and suddenly the website doesn't work, and kind of they've just generated work for no good reason. So there's those kind of fears, really. Also, just kind of making it easier for them to understand. The less menu items that there are, and the more they are confined to what it is that they'll be doing on a day-to-day basis. So a perfect example would be a website where the client, for a fact that all they need to do is to edit pages which currently exist, and create blog posts and delete blog posts and amend those blog posts. Just showing those options and nothing else, no settings, no other things, is just much more straightforward to them. You just log in, do your job, log out, and that's it. There's nothing to sort of stumble across or accidentally mess around with. And whilst that confines their experience with WordPress, it kind of makes their journey using WordPress a whole lot less painful, and they'll probably come out saying, oh yeah, our website's built on WordPress. Oh, it never goes wrong. It's an absolute breeze. And so that's good, I think, just to make it as simple as possible, so that when they log in, the UI is straightforward and easy to use. That's probably one of the main reasons I do it.
Yeah, and I suppose taking the opposite view on that one, and why to sort of keep everything open and not limit things, is the fact that, and I guess it depends on the ongoing relationship as well. The one thing that's quite nice, if they've got everything and they've got full admin rights, it also puts them in a position where they're kind of more responsible for their site, and I'm less so. So if they break stuff because they're messing around, then actually under my circumstances, they need to pay me to fix it.
Well, that is a good point. I suppose in some sense, having that, you never know, you might generate some work for yourself because you, some paid work for yourself because you've opened things up. I have to say that the whole WordPress way of handling permissions, I still find really curious. As I've said quite a few times in the past, I use Drupal a lot, and although I haven't used Drupal for many years, I would venture to say, and I think with some certainty, that the user permission system in Drupal is significantly superior to the way it's handled in WordPress. And what I mean by that is not necessarily the underlying architecture, but the user interface and the ease of setting up user roles. So you have to download plugins in WordPress to achieve this, or obviously write your own code. But the plugins expose, depending on which plugin that you've gone for. So one that I've got on my screen at the moment is one that I'm sure many people have looked at. There's one called User Role Editor. It's got lots and lots and lots of downloads, 600,000 downloads, so clearly it's in use. And another much smaller one that I've used in the past is just called Editor Menu and Widget Access, and it just enables and disables things to appear in the menu if they've got the editor role. And I would encourage people to go and look at that one, because I found that to be quite useful in the past. But the point is, you've got to use third-party solutions, and not everything is obvious or straightforward. Whereas in Drupal, it was out the box. The CMS comes with it built in, and you just tick boxes, and it's in plain English. You understand exactly what you're ticking, and if you tick it, exactly what somebody will be able to do, and it's very granular. So if you tick this box, anybody with the role of, and you can just type them in Drupal, you just make up your own user role. So I might have a role of, superhuman or something like that. And the superhuman role can, if I tick this box, they can create posts. If I tick this box, they can edit other people's posts. If I tick this box, they can delete other people's posts. If I tick this box, they can create who knows what. And the point is, it's simple tick box structure, out the box, dead easy to use. And when I came to WordPress, I just found nothing like that. And I was really curious, and still to this day, I'm curious as to how the user roles are kind of named. And, you've got lots of underscores inside those names, and you have to memorize what they are and what they're called. It's far less intuitive. Yeah. And the reason I mention that is because I think it's significantly more difficult. And so I'm arguing from your point of view, really. If you are going to be doing this, you do take on a little bit of a burden, whereas in something like Drupal, that was just out the box easy. But I still do it because I was used to doing it in Drupal. and I liked what it gave me. I liked that it gave me the capability to reduce the clutter, allow them only things which I wanted them to see. And so when I came to WordPress, I hankered for that a little bit, and found these plugins to enable me to do it.
So this debate wouldn't really happen in Drupal, would it?
No.
So you start with limited access and then you grant it as you go along, unless you're the person building the
Right.
site.
So what you would do is you would literally tick, if you wanted it to be an admin role, you would just literally tick every box on that screen. You would just tick them all, and there's an easy way of doing that. It sounds like it'd be really complicated, but you can select a button which selects them all, if you know what I mean, and then you can just remove them. And it was really nice in that many times I would have a client and I would limit their access to something, and then I'd get a phone call to say, why can't we? And I would literally go in and tick a box, which was so transparently obvious what its purpose was, and click save. And then whilst they're on the phone to me, I'd say, now try it. And oh yeah, thanks, got it. Right, we can do that now. That's great. And I think that's much more difficult to achieve, but I still wish to do it because I like, as I've said before, I like it to be simple for them to see and use, and also just have less clutter and so on and so forth. There's also the argument, though, of hiding things that really they've got no business seeing. So I suppose it depends on whether you've got them on a care plan or not. But hiding things like plugin licenses, for example, that's a whole debate. And I'm sure we've all been bitten where somebody's got your, let's say, for example, Gravity Forms license, which is an annual subscription. You've got to pay for that. And all of a sudden, you find that they've moved hosts. They're no longer communicating with you, but they've got your Gravity Form license and probably will have for the rest of time. And you're going to keep, probably paying for it for the other sites that you've got, but maybe they shouldn't have had it in the first place,
Yeah. Well, I've definitely had that. Because they've got full admin access, it means they can just install a plugin, duplicate the site, and disappear with all the licenses intact. And although we can disable them, most of them, from the plugins themselves, it's still a job to do. And not all of them could be. I remember Short Pixel, I needed to have changed my license key if it wasn't that the client did do the job for me and removed it. But
Oh, really? Because that has a material impact, doesn't it, on your so Short Pixel it crunches images down and makes them smaller in size, and you've got a limited amount of those images that you can crunch a month based upon a license. So a client having that could actually impact your business in some way, modest though it may be.
Yeah, it would have been quite a job because they couldn't really block that key. You would need to create a new key, so that would be a job of installing that into all existing clients. Fortunately, this client was good and they did remove it, so they didn't use it any longer. But that was one example of where the dangers. So I'm not really arguing my case. Let me go to a point where I can argue the opposite. So with full access, there are certain plugins which are not available to the editor. I know you're going to argue this. So one example might be if you're on a budget, if you wanted to use something like Analytify, which gives you your statistics from Google in the back end of your site in your dashboard. If you want to use the free version of that, that's only available to admins to get that information. So if I restrict that, I would definitely need to pay for the paid version of that.
Yeah, I suspect, as always, there'll be a way around that, won't there? But for most people, that's just a bridge too far. They don't want to go and figure out how that's done and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's a fair point. I've run into that loads of times where you just think, why wouldn't an editor be able to do that? That just seems really contrary to the spirit of what this plugin, for example, is offering. I just can't see a use case where an editor wouldn't have an option to be able to view their data. You'd think the plugin author would have added that in, but in many cases they haven't. They've always taken the assumption that only the admin gets hold of whatever this plugin's doing, and that's just how we're building it. And then you have to go in and figure out ways to, either purchase a key to unlock that functionality, or modify it, or change plugins or whatever. Yeah, I can see the point, and that's got me so many times going hunting around for sort of snippets of code here and there, or getting in touch with the developer and saying, is there any way that the editor can do this? And then in some cases, getting so frustrated with the fact that I can't work it out, just making it's going to be contrary to everything I've just said, making them an admin anyway, just because really the budget isn't in this project for me to go wasting time hunting this stuff down.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure in the cases where I've wanted to restrict and allow access, so the things that I've needed to change about the editor role have been access to forms and access to the theme options as well, which I've wanted to allow, which aren't there. But when it comes to some plugins, Analytify was my example, you can't, because you can't do that with a roles plugin, I don't believe, because it's not one of the official roles that prevent you from seeing that information.
Right.
So
there isn't a hook in there that roles plugin can get a hold of and make it enable it. No.
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, that's fair enough. It's their business model, but it's just one example of why, giving somebody free open use, they got access to certain free plugins that they can use, which they wouldn't normally be able to.
It is curious using these plugins to figure out what certain permissions will be allowed to which user role. It is curious sometimes what happens. You go in and tick a box and something utterly unexpected occurs on their end, because the naming conventions are sometimes so inexplicable and difficult to sort of figure out. I've done that so many times, as I said earlier. Just essentially, you've got an incognito window open over here on a different screen with a contrived editor user that I've just invented, and I go and tick a box on the plugin, thinking, well, it's definitely going to do what I want, and then you go over and curious, nothing seems to have changed. Or if it has changed, no, that's not what I wanted. And there's quite a lot of cat and mouse trying to figure out which boxes to tick. And honestly, I think I've wasted quite a lot of hours figuring that out. And I do it infrequently enough that I never memorize what these things are. So every time I wish to do this, I have to sort of begin again. I haven't got a template figured out for, okay, these are the ones that I typically wish to tick. I should probably just screenshot it or something. That would be probably an easier way of tackling it.
Yeah. Do you know, I mean, one of the things, arguing again from my side, which is the limited client access, I've not really seen any difference going from one to the other. So when I limited it, I mentioned I had a few issues with it. When I've gone full access as a reaction to that, I've really lost all those issues. Nobody's come to me and said it's really complicated in the back end. They just don't go to where I don't show them to go. So they don't go into the plugins and they don't go into these extra options which have been added to my menu, which you see as an admin. So I kind of question whether that much is gained from a user perspective. Don't most of the clients only do a very limited number of things and they just learn their little routes and ignore the rest?
I think you're probably right in that if I was to be confronted, let's say I start work on something and they say, well, you need to log into our CRM. You've never seen this CRM before, but just log in and do these particular tasks. I would just do that. I'd follow the instructions. I wouldn't sort of try and figure out, what can I do with this CRM that I shouldn't be allowed to do? Let me go and poke around and see what happens. No, I probably wouldn't. I suppose it does come from a position of just wishing to save the possibility that they're going to do something wrong. And then, of course, there are a lot of people who deliberately go out and try to hide WordPress and go to great lengths to completely... Well, okay, that's extreme. Some people do wish to remove WordPress. Many people just wish to remove any option like I described. But there are a lot of people who completely modify their WordPress install. So I'm thinking of things like, WAS sites, and they're selling the ability to publish a website. They're selling that as a platform, and they don't, for some reason, don't wish to acknowledge that it's WordPress that has built this. I suppose in a sense they're afraid that would cheapen the offering, maybe make people question whether or not there's actually any value if WordPress is free. And so they go and they hide it, change the colors, remove the WordPress logo, fiddle with the menus, move them up and down, add widgets. And so there's a load of plugins that we've talked about extensively in the past, especially on the news, that as they constantly get updated, like, plugins that enabled you to completely modify the dashboard. And I'm sort of torn on those. I haven't so far used those kind of plugins. All I've done is disable or enable things which would have been enabled to an admin user. I've just made them non-available or available depending. I haven't gone to the lengths of customizing the dashboard so it's got, I don't know, a welcome video, or it's got some form on there where they can contact me for support or something. But I know a lot of people have done that. And I suppose doing that, you can lock things down and make the journey for them a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I've definitely played around with this. It's when I'm kind of finding my feet on what my business is supposed to be about, and I've been swayed by people. So that's why I played around with a lot of this stuff. It wasn't just about my client's user experience. There was an element where, to a point, I wanted to hide it and claim it was kind of my work, in my early days. I feel, for my type of business, I've kind of grown up from that one. Now it's like, no, look, I just work with you. My skills are enough, surely, to see the value in me. So I don't try and hide it. And I think for me personally, I'm much happier with that kind of openness with it, because I'm quite happy with who I am. And I kind of want less of the responsibility for what might happen to WordPress and the plugins that I look after.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I do find that curious. I've never hidden WordPress, but I've hidden capabilities, as I said. I wonder if there is some legitimacy in that. I'm trying to put myself in the position of somebody who was coming to me wishing to have a website built, and I don't necessarily announce that I'm using WordPress right from the offset. I might just say, I'll talk about websites in general. I'll talk about the fact that we use what's called a CMS and things like that, and won't necessarily talk about WordPress, and certainly don't get into the whole conversation about plugins that you could use to do it. And I wonder if that's some part of me that feels that if they realise that this can be achieved through a free CMS and in some cases free plugins, if I'm kind of reducing my likelihood of getting that client on board, the reality, of course, is that if somebody's coming to me wanting to have a website built, it's because I can build it, because I know over many years which ones are of use and which ones are not of use and which ones I can work with. And they simply don't have the time, in the same way that I don't go to the mechanic and ask him how he's going to fix the car and then say, do you know what? I think I'll just take it home and do it myself. It's just not what you do, is it? I need to get out of that a bit more and embrace it a bit more like you do. But I don't hide WordPress. But then again, I don't really push it at the beginning because I just think it clutters that debate. WordPress? What's that? Just sort of don't mention it until later on in the process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, definitely I've changed over the time. And if you've got a model, really where you are, I guess, kind of value pricing model particularly, where you're taking the view that the clients don't need that, they're looking for the end results, that's what you're selling, that you're going to be more led towards the idea of limiting certain access so they don't see the tools that you're using. And I've gone completely, although I was always tempted by that, I've realized, my best model for me is going to be the complete opposite of that. So I've kind of embraced it, and I start right from the beginning with this is WordPress and why I think it's quite a good choice for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, shooting myself in the foot somewhat here. On the occasions where I've given clients complete admin rights, I'm struggling to find an episode where that's backfired, where the client has just gone, like I said earlier, all cavalier and has just started to fiddle and broken things. Most of it is the opposite, actually, is that clients wish to do things and suddenly realise there's a limitation. And usually it's a limitation which I hadn't foreseen. So, the plugins that I've installed limiting the capabilities, I hadn't tried every single permutation of everything. And then I suddenly realised that something that I said that they could do, they actually can't do. And then I've had to go and unbreak that. Whereas if they've got the capability at the outset, interesting. I think I've swapped sides, David.
I think I've swapped sides because I'm going to argue again. Although both sides really, because one of the things was, because I'm looking after the sites and I've got to look after the security of those sites, really I don't want the clients installing plugins that I don't really trust, because some are not so great on the security and I won't know about it until the next update, until it shows up in my main WP dashboard or something. So, this is, And I think I've managed to tell most clients, please talk to me if you want. It's your site, you could do it, but please talk to me because I've got some experience with this. And there is one client, and this is where, in a way, it's for limiting is a good thing. But the other day, one of my clients who does seem to shove in his own plugins and doesn't ask me about it, he put in a plugin, I can't remember the name of it, and I thought, oh, he's done it again, what is it? And I looked at it, and it was this fabulous plugin I'd not seen before, and I thought, I'm going to use that more often. I thought, he must have done his research on it. It was really, I can't remember what the plugin's called.
That's really curious. So you actually learned something. But you know what? Do you know what's really nice about that is that you've clearly, well, I say you've clearly, maybe this person was familiar with WordPress prior to you building their WordPress website, but perhaps not. They've taken it on board and they've become a member of the community. And anybody who's found themselves onto the WordPress repo, probably through the admin interface, probably not going out searching on Google, who knows, is kind of like getting into the whole ecosystem, the community at large. And so I think that's actually a total win.
Yeah, so it's funny. It can work both ways, but I thought that particularly with this one person who installs plugins, but his choices are pretty good. But the last one, I just thought, oh wow, I didn't know about that. By a good developer, it was a really useful thing.
Yeah, and of course that's another debate altogether, isn't it? The plethora of things which they could go and install. But again, in my defence, sticking it to the limited side, that person could just as easily have stuck in a real dud and made your life a little bit more difficult by sticking something in and then expecting it to work. Because honestly, if you're not familiar with WordPress and the way that the whole UI looks, you would assume to a great extent that all plugins just work. The way this platform's built is you just add a plugin, it just works. Yeah. There's going to be no problem. And of course, some things can have catastrophic effects on all sorts of things.
Yeah. Do you know what? And I think one that I've seen with people that I'm not managing, and I've gone and looked at their sites, is a whole bunch of people when the GDPR stuff came out, they must have installed many of those kind of cookie policy plugins and stuff like that. And I think nearly most of the ones I've seen of those, I've had some security issues somewhere down the line. And in fact, I've had to fix people's sites because of installing those plugins.
Do you offer different? I know that you've been arguing from the full access point of view, but do you, based upon what your perception is of whether they'll stay with you, like let's assume that's a care plan, or, they're going to continue to pay you some money. Do you offer a different approach to this? In other words, if they're not going to be sticking with you, upon finishing the site, do you then turn it over as admin, or would you keep it limited on the basis that, I don't know, maybe there's some licenses in there, or maybe they'll come back to you for some additional work later on because they've discovered limitations?
You know what? I mean, that's kind of almost another debate in this, isn't it? About who owns the site a bit, isn't it? I mean, my view is simply, I do now, so I've gone over to your side, I do now limit the access initially that I give people, and there's some videos that explain that I've done that, but I also tell them that at any point they can have full administrator rights, but also if they're leaving, they just get zoomed up to full admin. That's it, simple as that.
Yeah. I can't see any downside to that. If they're not on your hosting, if they're not going to be continuing to pay you anything, and presumably if you've explained the licensing and how they need to take those on board for themselves, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? Here's the site, there you go, upload that to your server, you're on your own, but we're here if you need help.
It would be so tempting though to not give that access, but then I don't know how they would move the site, really. I don't know how that would work.
No, interesting. I think during the course of this debate, I think I probably have changed position a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to change a lot. I think on most sites where I'm going to be having an ongoing relationship, I'm going to stick to the editor role and use more often than not use this editor menu. What's it called again? Editor menu and widget access. I really have enjoyed using that one. It has made the process a lot easier. And And then if they're not going to be sticking with me, just admin all the way, even at the point of building the site. But I suppose I've got to figure out at the beginning whether or not they're going to be sticking with me. But usually I've worked that one out by the time they've signed on the dotted line.
Yeah, and I already was moved to your direction anyway. But I think we're probably in the same place with the way that we work. We're not hiding anything. We'll try and make it as easy as possible for them to avoid some issues, but it's their choice at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting as well because I think the badge of WordPress, the sort of brand of WordPress, is becoming a real positive. And although it's free to use, I don't think it's anything to hide away from. In fact, I think it's something that you can use to say, well, currently it's about 36.5% of the world's top 10 million websites are using it. That's a really powerful message. And, hiding it maybe is something that is going to work against you, because they'll kind of expect you to have written all the code yourself to understand every line of it. And when you hit a problem, which you will do at some point with a lot of these things, the idea that you aren't immediately able to fix it because you've got to write a support ticket to some developer elsewhere because their plugin seems to be the problem, that might cause problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if, even though we all know WordPress is free, but I'm wondering really if most people who go into it really do think of it as free, that because premium plugins have become so central to this that I'm wondering if that's the case. Do people still see it as, oh, it's WordPress, it's free, so it doesn't really, it's not got any value? I don't know if that's the case any longer.
Yeah, not a position I've ever really taken. Like I said, I don't describe it right at the very outset, because it just seems to me those conversations usually are about, look, you need a website. This is what we can do for you, and it there just doesn't seem to be a lot of mileage talking about WordPress too much. But then as things develop and you realise, okay, this is a bit of a lead now. Okay, we're getting closer to this becoming a contract and so on. I don't have any problem mentioning WordPress, and I mention it multiple times in my contracts and so on and so forth.
Yep. So we got a conclusion. Is it really for us? It's kind of limited and full access. Both can be applied.
Yeah, I think for me, in a typical install, I'm going to limit access, not out of any desire to hide anything, just out of a desire to make it easier for them, really, clutter free and so on. And that's probably what I'll do. And then if they're moving away, just go into their user profile, make them an administrator, click save, and then hand it over and say, now you can do anything that you like. Just be careful.
Yeah. It would be fabulous to hear people who take a completely opposing view and they want to limit the access. Well, people who have ownership, who claim ownership over their sites, and that would be very interesting, like the WAS, as you're saying.
Yeah, indeed.
Those views.
And that seems to be a growing phenomenon as well. So, definitely put some comments below. Feel free to do that. You can always put some comments in our Facebook group, wpbuilds.com/Facebook, if you fancy doing that. That was a nice little debate. I enjoyed that. Thanks, David.
Yeah, me too. Cheers. Bye.
Well, that was interesting. I always like chatting to David about these things. I hope that you enjoyed it. Maybe we have a similar position to you. Maybe we're entirely different and you have a new and interesting way of limiting access for your WordPress website clients. If so, and you'd like to comment, please head over to wpbuilds.com, leave a comment underneath the post, or head to our Facebook group, wpbuilds.com/Facebook, and leave a comment on the post that you'll find there. The WP Builds podcast was brought to you today by A/B Split Test. Want to set up your A/B Split Test in record time? The new A/B Split Test plugin for WordPress will have you up and running in a couple of minutes. Use your existing pages and test anything against anything else. Buttons, images, headers, rows, really anything. And the best part, it works with Elementor, Beaver Builder, and the WordPress block editor. You can check it out at absplittest.com. Okie dokie. I hope that you'll come back and join us next week. Next Thursday, we'll have a new podcast. Also, on a Monday, like I said, there's the live news and the regular news. So hopefully we'll see you at some point. All that remains for me to do is to fade in some dreadful cheesy music, as we do each week, and say bye-bye for now.